If there's an area in your life where you want to grow, it can be difficult to know just how to make progress. In this episode, we discuss how to get started by formulating clear strategies and specific steps. That is, by applying the virtue of prudence to the question of growth. I'm Sharif Yunus with Dr. Kevin Majors, and this is The Golden Hour. Personal growth plays a central role in OptimWorks' approach. Our online masterclass will give you this complete approach, our entire theory, method, and measure of growth. In this 4-week masterclass available on OptimWork.com, Dr. Majors will guide you through all the key ideas of optimal work, with exercises provided to help you master them. Now let's get started. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of The Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's great to be here. So, Kevin, one thing that I've been thinking about is kind of the relationship between work and personal growth. And I think we often see work. One thing we try to help people see at Optimal Work is the relationship between the two, and that work is a means of growing. But sometimes it can happen that it just makes us busy and crowds us out. So it's the question that I have for you is a little bit like, how do we keep our personal growth at the forefront of things? And how do we make that the central, focus in our lives? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And in some sense, we have to be really experts at working our growth. And that's the personal expertise that each of us needs to be developing in life so that we are good at getting ourselves to grow. And that's, I think, really when we talk about things like self-mastery, that means our ability to attain mastery in various aspects within ourselves. So each of us has a certain amount of, you could say our past or our, baggage that is both biological and experiential, that we carry with us in a sense. And I think that we really would need a kind of to be enthused with the prospect of shaping ourselves, of turning that growth into real work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's this idea then that we need to get better at growing, but that seems to be like a kind of vicious circle, if you like. Okay, how do I get started? So how would you recommend? I mean, suppose I have some personal goal of mine, like I want to become more patient. I've noticed that I often have outbursts, and so I think it's easy for me to go a whole day without even thinking about that a single time. Even though maybe if I reflect on it a little bit, I would have this sense, okay, yeah, I want to grow in patience. But then how does that manifest itself in my day? How do I make that a reality?
Yeah. So I would ask you then, how long do you think it would take you to grow in patience? Mm-hmm. Whenever we're starting some kind of, project at work, don't you think about how long will it take?
Yeah. Duration.
But it's interesting. What's the duration, do you think, for that?
I guess it's a lifelong task, right? I'll never be perfectly patient.
I think that would be a problem because that essentially, would mean that if we think that, okay, now this is tricky because yes, you can always grow more patient. It's an ideal, and so it can never be exhausted, but yet it still guides our activity day by day. But that's maybe a little different than asking, like, what would it take for me to make some major strides in being patient? And that's a fascinating question to ask ourselves. How long would it take? How many hours of what kind of practice would you need for patience to become now a deeply possessed quality? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the intensity of the learning experience. So if you could endure some much greater discomfort or inconvenience or something and yet maintain an inner cheerfulness about it and towards it, that would be even more quickly shaping in patience. So now that doesn't mean that you can in advance say, okay, it's probably going to take me 7 hours of this quantum of agony to actually get to patients. But at least it makes it in your mind something a little more real than it's going to be a lifelong struggle. That's what does that sound right?
Yes. Okay. So the first step is to kind of narrow down the scope of what I want to work on, is to think. So do I have to think of what exactly is the progress that I want to make? Like I want to be able to handle such and such a situation.
Mm-hmm. The way I'd look at it more is, how would you turn patience into a project? Okay, that's your goal. Your goal is to become a more patient person. So that means then that you want to have strategies you could use, and then those strategies would give you different steps you could take. Those steps need to be really concrete. Steps are what typically have some kind of time associated with them. So one way of growing in patience is by, the strategy could be learning to more deeply appreciate it. Okay, and that could be, I'm going to spend 10 minutes looking for a good book that would somehow bear on this topic, but only 10 minutes, because book searches can go on forever. But I'm going to spend 10 minutes looking for a book, or I'm going to spend 15 minutes brainstorming my memories of people being patient with me, and to say, okay, what was it that really I liked most about their patience? So, or I'm going to free write about this for a certain amount of time, on ways that perhaps I could now be patient. Free writing is a nice way of getting past your internal censors. So you just try to type as fast as you can without slowing down or stopping or correcting, and you get things out. And it can be very powerful at unlocking, new ways of growing. That's what I'm talking about. I would say I would want you to populate, your mind with some steps that you could take that would be very real. I think that would actually make it a much more doable thing to grow in patience.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And as you were explaining that, the notion of the illusion of simultaneity came to mind, where if you just have this thought of, okay, I'm going to grow in patience, it makes it all into one big thing. So you think, okay, I have to grow in patience all at the same time or all at once. But by breaking it down into steps, you see, okay, no, actually, there's a way that I can grow in patience in a small amount by doing this particular thing, and you can break it up into steps and then make progress that way. So that, I think, can help.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the illusion of simultaneity is what afflicts us anytime we're about to be, we're feeling overwhelmed, or anytime we're procrastinating on something. It can seem like then that all the steps are occurring at the same time. And so it's just, we put it off. But you need to rotate your view of it and see that actually, no, they are discrete steps that you'll go through, and each of those is doable. So that's exactly the same idea here. Like, you just break it apart into smaller things. So then you could be looking at what experiments could I do that I know would test my patience. That I'm going, so, for me right now, a great test would be trying to call Apple to get help with the computer. So I've had some struggles with trying to get some things there, and but it's a really predictable and beautiful way of growing in patience. So it does help before calls to be thinking of it in those terms. Okay, this is going to be very helpful for me, and my whole goal is just to stay patient and cheerful when I'm on the phone with them. Apple's a great company. I'm a huge fan, but it's just that, but when you have to deal with customer service, you just be prepared. It's like calling the bank for some reason. It's like, so I think that's the kind of thing where if you could think of like, what experiments would I run in advance to grow in this way? But we see a lot. It's fascinating that on our masterclass on day 9, there's this exercise we do called the tranquility of order, where we take people to think of the bigger problems they're facing right now, and then go through this exercise called tranquility of order. And that exercise is essentially helping them think of prioritizing the problems, choosing the top one, and then break that down into very specific steps that you're going to carry out with time limits assigned. But it often does. so many times this has happened where people will say, oh, I didn't know that this was just for work steps or work challenges. And so they'd put some kind of bigger challenge in life, something equivalent to becoming patient. And they're surprised. But, when I reply to them and say, oh, no, that's exactly the kind of thing that you want to turn your problem into a project. That's exactly what we want. Because then you're going to be specific, real about it. And then, you can do brainstorming and things. So I think that's exactly the right idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea of, okay, I have this problem. I want to grow in this particular area. So how do I break it down? And yeah, I guess, one issue still is, okay, when do I do that? I guess anyone should have enough time to, if they really are committed to growing in patience, they should have enough time. I should have enough time to sit down for 15 minutes and just take this time to craft it into a project.
Yeah. Because if patience were a real issue for you, then it would be because whenever the opportunities to grow in that come along, you somehow push past them. And so I think that, that in my mind is why we don't grow. Somehow we are habitually missing the opportunities to grow that life is giving us. And so it gets tougher and we realize, okay, this is something that gets tougher and tougher. No, but that's actually better and better. So right now, then life is going to give you lots of ways of growing in it. You have to think, how do you get yourself ready for those opportunities? But just an exercise of turning it into a project that you have a goal that's pretty clear, growing in this, and then you have strategies and steps. I say projects here the way we talk about in optimal work, and we have a tool on optimal work called projects that I think is actually a very powerful tool of self-transformation, depending on how you use it. And then one thing to know that you are making the right choice in going about growing in this way. Well, not in this, but so say you want to grow in patience. If you were to come up with several strategies for growing in it, I think then you could actually make a decision which strategy is best. But if you don't come up with several strategies, you just can go with whatever first comes to your mind. So one could be growing an appreciation for patience. Or I don't know, what would another one be?
Yeah. Any type of problem. Well, I guess you could have a more concrete one, like how to find a job. I'm sure you deal with ones that, in your practice that patients have, of people who want to overcome anxiety or people who want to be more focused in their work. Right now, I want to be more focused in my work.
Yeah. So if you want to be more focused in your work, then I would say there are going to be different strategies you could be using to grow more focus in your work. And then that's what you want to come up with multiples of. So you have several strategies now to choose from, and then you can, come up with what's the best one. One way that people can kind of guide themselves in this is to think in optimal work terms of reframing, mindfulness, and challenge. Those are going to guide, I think, different types of strategies. So with the patience one, well, growing an appreciation patience would be more of the reframe. That would be that is trying to see the positivity, how positive it is. The other is just thinking of it in terms of how it relates to how mindful you are. And if you were more mindful, would that be a nice intermediate goal to becoming patient? And then you're just going to double down on mindfulness strategies. And then you could think of a number of steps you could do throughout the day that would grow you in mindfulness. Or then the more of a challenge strategy. So I think that's the way that it's like a nice, quick way of coming up with totally different types of strategies. Because one is more about your attitude, one about your attention, and one about your action. But then in the end, you can do particular things. When it comes to attitude, that's probably the one that most people aren't used to. Kind of, I think, brainstorming and reading. We have a tool called the Reframer, which lets you consider things from different points of view. That way, you can ask yourself, what for me is the best strategy to choose? Now my goal is growing in this way. If focusing in work, it's the exact same thing. You start to be thinking, what I'm going to try to do is first just be more observant of what the actual obstacles are, and I'm going to write them down. So it's going to be first, I'm just going to work on being more understanding with the real problem. Okay. Then if you want to be more understanding, what would be the steps? So that's a nice thing. There's not one right way of growing. There's not one right perfect means for any end. But really what you want and to have mastery is you have to have mastery of choosing the right strategies. You know you've mastered something when you have multiple strategies available for you, and then you can choose the right one to attain the end.
Yeah. So then, Kevin, I mean, zooming out a little bit. So if someone, say, has this problem that they've turned into a project and they're going to try to work on it through their daily activities or through some specific step that they've identified, I guess two kind of bigger picture questions. So one, how would a person identify this area that they need to grow in? And then two, do you always just focus on one at a time? Like, this week is my week for focus. Or can I say, well, I want to grow in focus and patience, so I'm going to do focus while I'm at work because work naturally lends itself to practicing focus. And then when I get home, then that's when I'm going to practice patience. So I kind of have two of these projects live at a given point in my life.
Yeah. So I guess that as far as choosing the right goal, that just has to do with what are the biggest problems right now you're facing. So you have to have a way of prioritizing them. I think I would choose the highest priority one that you can. So is there something that touches on deeper bonds? And so you kind of go through then, who is most important to you in life? And then how are you building that bond right now? Are there problems in the area of that bond? Well, that's definitely going to be, if a person, like, if the relationship, or marriage is, let's say his marriage is falling apart, well, being more ordered, in your work drawers may not be the thing, that's going to be the highest yield. So it might be, whereas for someone else, that could be a game changer for them, because they're always forgetting things. And it turns out that just having more order would actually make all the difference. So where's the main pain point in your life? So where is the thing that you'd tend to complain about the most? Or that triggers dread in you, or just triggers the biggest emotions in you. I think emotions are really a wonderful signal of where growth is waiting to happen. So all emotions are like that. And so if you have any strong emotion, you should be curious about it. And with a growth mindset. Okay, well, what's the thing here? And then you getting that into that chief pain, into focus, there you have like a good goal to work on. And then in terms of how you go about, like, should you have multiple goals? Well, I would say do it with one of them first. But you do get a sense of wind behind your, wind in your sails once you've addressed a major issue in a new, concrete, constructive way. It feels like a whole new kind of lease on life. And so that's what I would want people to experience who are listening to this. It's a very new experience to take, even if it's a long-standing problem, to try to turn it into practical steps of what you could do to see it in a new way, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And okay, then relating this to one thing that I know you've been thinking about a lot lately, which is coaching and mentoring and dealing with other people. So if we have this sense that, okay, I've identified maybe a pain point I've identified several pain points in my life, or areas where I want to grow, or challenges or things I complain about. And then now I take the main one and I turn it into a project. And so I have, obviously the goal kind of comes almost automatically from that. Then I develop a couple different strategies. I pick the best one. I get the concrete steps. Where does another person fit into this? So if we wanted to seek someone's advice, would we kind of share with, would it be at every step of the process, someone else can be helpful in saying, well, actually, I don't think that's the main pain point you're facing. That maybe if it's someone who lives with us, they can provide particularly good insight. They know us very well. Or if it's maybe a more objective outside observer. So I don't know, maybe you can give us some thoughts about how another person might fit into this process.
Well, it does remind me that when we're talking about this idea of like, how do you really have mastery, over the process of making decisions, in the process of choosing how to grow and what's the right way, that gets into this, the ideal of prudence. So prudence is how you choose the best means to the best end. And I think really what we're talking about here is how to grow in prudence. So prudence is all about, again, the best end is your own personal growth. That's at least one of the best ends you could possibly have. I think because if you're really aiming to grow as much as you can yourself, then you can treat others that way and help them to grow as much as they can. But if you're not trying to do that yourself, it would be hypocrisy to help others to grow. So I think that the basis of our ability to do good in the world is our ability to do good in our own life by shaping ourselves. And that prudence really is knowing how to grow. And the main act of prudence, if you go back to, the great philosophers, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, is actually to have an image in your mind of the beautiful action before you do it. So that's actually that's the essential part of the act of prudence, which is why it's not about making rules and applying them. No, it's about more of an image of beauty, that then you're applying to an action, image of some perfected ability in acting. All of that is to say then that the first act of prudence is to seek advice. Actually, it's to take counsel. And so taking counsel means, in your own mind, thinking it through. So trying to do your best to do that. But then, yes, also talking to people who are trustworthy, people whose opinion you could, so that you can make sure that you're making the right decisions. So I think that's really important, that people have trusted advisors that they can turn to in this. But with that said, if you don't seem to have one, taking counsel can mean, that at least you're taking time to deeply think through the steps at some moment when you're calm, when you know that your reason is. And the main thing you're looking for to make sure this is a good decision or like a good area to focus on is that you're not seeking self-satisfaction. Because that's like the doppelganger of prudence, is a kind of cunning in getting what you want. And so we don't want self-satisfaction. This is all from Thomas Aquinas, is in the Prima Secunda, Secunda on prudence, that it's all, but pursuing your own satisfaction is what undermines radically prudence, then uses it for bad. And instead, you have to be truly seeking your own growth and the good of others. Okay,
yeah.
Is that?
Yeah,
Actually,
no, it was a lot, but I think it was great. So quick follow-up, because as you were talking, I started getting the sense of, maybe also I was just thinking a little bit about what I wanted to say next, but was this idea of sincerity. Because when you have your list of, say, your problems or your pain points and you're trying to figure out the best one, someone might say, okay, you need to be sincere about yourself, because it's like the example you gave earlier about the person who maybe their marriage is falling apart and they're like, I really just need to put more order into my desk. It's like, okay, there's a kind of lack of sincerity there potentially. And then at the same time, if they go and describe their problems to someone else or their situation, we talk about the mentor needs to have understanding. The coach needs to have understanding so they can help get to, okay, what is the challenge that this person needs to focus on? The flip side of that, I think, is that the person being coached or the mentee needs to have sincerity. And so they need to actually put forth the truth. But then you just hit on another aspect of sincerity to me, which is like, what are you seeking? Are you seeking your own Are you seeking your own satisfaction? Or so I'm just wondering, can you speak a little bit to the relationship between sincerity and prudence here?
Yeah. So I think, I think you stated it really well just now. That was great, Sharif. So that this idea that because self-seeking undermines prudence the most, it is the main thing that you're on the lookout for. That's the main enemy, you could say, of prudence is self-seeking. And the people who end up seeking their own satisfaction and never admit it to themselves, it's so sad, because the thing that's truly satisfying in life is growing ourselves and giving ourselves. And if you aren't able to grow, because again, prudence really is about being able to grow. It's the ideal that orders growth itself, so that now you are growing in the right ways, using the right means. So how sad it is then, like that, to undermine all of that because you won't let go of a certain satisfaction. And that's what insincerity is all about. It's like choosing self-satisfaction rather than the higher goods in your life, which is your own growth and your bonds with others. So yeah, I think that sincerity is a different kind of virtue, but in some ways you need it in order to be prudent. And yet, if you're going to grow in sincerity, you need prudence in order to grow in it. So these things, they all kind of, they're interdependent, with each other.
Yeah, great. Well, that's super helpful. Kevin, we're basically out of time now. So I don't know if you want to summarize or give us some final thoughts.
One last point that I think I was thinking of when we were just talking about other people and how they relate to this. My biggest caution also would be, don't turn other people into projects. So I think that we should only be strategizing our own actions, because that's all we can control. So if you're making a project out of a way of growing, okay, my goal is to grow in this, the strategy has to be something you have control over, because the steps are the things you're going to do and that you're going to follow through. Well, that means is that other people cannot be your projects. And so a lot of times people, I think, get frustrated because they aren't really growing as much as they can grow themselves. And all their attention is on how others can grow. Like they make a project of correcting others and tweaking others' behaviors and criticizing others' behaviors. When I think that does get it deeply backwards. No, so your own problems, should become your own projects. And other people will have to take care of themselves in that sense.
Interesting. Actually, can I ask a follow-up question? I guess time is not as short as we once thought. But so not making other people into your projects, I don't know if you have thoughts on how that would apply to a parent and child relationship. Like if they're a parent, okay, I really need to help, Billy get more serious about his studies. So I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to show him a movie about, someone who doesn't take their school seriously and they end up in a terrible situation or whatever. So, but are you saying that's not the approach that a parent or someone in maybe any relationship of authority should take? They don't turn their kids or a manager to the employees into projects?
I think that in general, what we don't want to do is to be doing all the work of strategizing for anyone else. And so now for very young kids, it's going to have to, change what needs to be changed. But as kids are getting older, you can't just be that every thing that they do is like laid out for them in advance by the parents. And the parents have been applying the parental mind to them, and working out all the steps that they have to go through. It seems to me that instead the parents should work together to see what are the goals that they have for the kids, and then how do they help those to be attractive, so that now they can get them on board. And then the parents are there as a resource for strategies and steps that the kids could take to do it, but not, I don't think, imposing it from above, and saying, here are the strategies that you're going to use. And So if the kid has a goal, let's say the kid really wants to become great at a sport or great at an instrument or to have more friends, the role of the parent isn't to just tell them step by step, this is what you do. I think that in the end makes kids more confident, but you can help them brainstorm ways that they could do it. The more it comes from within, the more, because even though you're the parent, the kid also is the one who's living his life or her life and might actually have more of a view on the ground, so to speak, of what they could do differently and what they could start doing. So that you want this to come as much as possible from them. Because if they don't learn how to strategize their own goals, they're never going to become prudent themselves. And prudence is the foundation for every other growth and ideals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it seems also like you're creating then a healthy sense of freedom and responsibility in their lives.
Yeah, there's lots of angles of looking at it that I think it holds up very well in the end. And I think it's how so many, I get to see so many great families, and I think that that's like a common element in it, is that the kids actually learn to strategize on their own, how to do things. And the parents were a resource, but not a replacement for that process.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, Kevin, this has been awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Great questions.
All right. We'll be back next week. Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out optimwork.com for a set of online tools to help you engage challenge in your life. See you next week.